So recently I came across this article about well, actually, it wasn't an article. Let me correct myself. So it was something I was looking at that led me to Miss Pam Grier. I can't remember what, but then I just went down a rabbit hole of Pam Grier, movies, books, everything, right? So I decided to give her autobiography, Pam Grier, My Life in 3 Acts, a read. Now, this is kind of on the old side. It came out, well, I mean, yeah, it's old. It came out, I believe, in let's see, copyright is 2010. Actually, it's called Foxy, My Life in 3 Acts. And she wrote this with Andrea Kagan, I believe. I think that's how you pronounce her name. So, anyway, I decided to give this book a read. And it is a short book. It is 280 pages. Now, I got the ebook and I thought normally when I see a book is short like that, I'm a little hesitant about spending my money. But I must say, this book, from the very first page, Pam holds no punches, okay? Miss Grier, she gets straight to the point. She does not waste your time. And I mean, I just found it a little, I guess, peculiar because she has lived such a life. And at this point, she was probably around 50-ish in 2010. I'm not sure exactly her age. 2010 or 60-ish. I don't know. So I'm just expecting the book to be much longer because of the life she lived and the years she lived. But it's only 280 pages. However, it is definitely worth your time. And again, it is an older book, but I don't think she has come out with anything recently to add to it. So in this book, you learn a lot about her personal and professional life. Pam Grier grew up, well, first she was, okay, let me get this straight. I believe her father was in I can't remember if it was the Army. Okay, so her biological father, was an Air Force technician. Now, this is, I think, the 60s and 70s. So, obviously, there was discrimination against Black people at that time. And though they were allowed to work, I mean, technically, they could get a job, but obstacles were put in place to prevent them from going so far within their careers. And Pam Grier's father definitely experienced that in his career. She talked about how he was very light-skinned to the point that he could be assumed a white man, which worked to his benefit, as in the case when they showed up to their new residence expecting to live there. And the Air Force, they put him on base with his family. He was married with children. And they came to, take a look at the residence. But then when, I guess, the officials learned of his Blackness, I assume because of his wife and kids who weren't as fair-skinned as him, they quickly switched gears and said, yeah, you got to live off base because that's what they did in that time through legal segregation and whatnot. So they ended up in completely different residence that was of lower standards, we'll say. But yeah, Pam Grier, she grew up as, an army brat. She lived in England. They lived in Ohio and Denver. They obviously moved around a lot, but it sounds like around 12, 13 years old, the family finally settled into Denver, Colorado. And at this point, Pam Grier's father retired from the Air Force, and he kind of went through a struggle when he came home. So during the time that he was away, his wife, Pam Grier's mother, she got a nursing degree and started working full time as a nurse and bringing in money for the family. So she had that independence about her. And then her mother gave her a loan so that she can purchase a home for, her and her kids. Because at this point, I think she was living, Pam Grier and her family, they were living with the mother's sister. So, yeah, that's what was going on there. They were actually living in an apartment. I believe it was in the projects in Denver, but basically Pam Grier's aunt, she had, I think, 3 kids herself. And then, Pam Grier's mother, I believe she had 3 or 4. So it basically was a crowded place, right? And sometimes, you know what? I think I did read that sometimes she would go between the sister's home and her parents' home. But that relationship, both relationships were a little bit rocky. So Pam Grier does tell stories of her aunt being a belligerent drunk, we'll say. She would get drunk and become violent, and it just wasn't a safe place. So at one point, I guess Pam Grier's mom took the kids and moved in with her mom. And then, that wasn't that wasn't so good as well, but it was a little bit better. And it was at I think her uncle's farm, Pam Grier's uncle, that she discovered her love of horses. But to get back to my point, Pam Grier's mother, her mom, gave her a loan, and with that loan and her own money that she made from working as a nurse, the mother purchased a brick house in Denver in this area which was designated the only area that Black families could live in at that time. So the mother gets this home and she makes it all nice and gets ready for, her husband to come home. He's about to retire and they don't have to keep running around all over the globe or whatever. And he just, I guess his manhood wouldn't allow him to live in a home that was purchased by his wife. So they ended up splitting up. He moved across town and left his wife and kids. They officially divorced at some point, and he remarried. And it sounds like he never returned to the home. He just up and left his family because he didn't know how to adjust to his wife being a provider. And so there's that. But one other thing I want to point out, this is a memoir. It's about the actress's life. So she goes through some very rocky times, but one of them being rape and sexual assault. So by the age of 18, she was sexually assaulted twice. And when I read the first time, because she was so young, I think she said she was 6 years old, I immediately thought she was lying about the experience because I couldn't see someone doing those things to such a young child. Now, granted, the people involved, some of them, it sounds like, were cousins and then kids from the neighborhood. But it was just so... I don't have words for it, but I mean, it shocked me so much that I thought it had to be a lie. But again, I'm just not the kind of person who could even conceive of that kind of behavior, so I just immediately reject it in my mind. But obviously, those things do happen. So just a heads up, she does talk about two different events that happened. One when she was a young age, I'm talking 6 years old, and another when she was around 17 or 18. And it almost feels like there was a second rape following the initial rape. One of them is sexual assault and one is rape. And each event, it's like she's being abused all over again because she has to remain silent in both situations because she's fearing the repercussions of exposing her rapists and those who assaulted her, because for one, she doesn't want to get her family in trouble. If she told her father or her stepfather, obviously they're going to go after the person, and then that might get them into trouble. They might go to jail or whatever. But then also, she's worrying about the attacker coming back and doing something to her and retaliating for her exposing them for who they are. And then just it sounds like it's a very tight-knit community. So just, you can imagine the shame she felt, but also not wanting everyone to know the situation. And that's probably why those people behaved like that, because they knew the girls wouldn't want to talk about that after it happened. But anyway, that's in there, just so you know. And it was pretty heavy and intense. Fast forward, there's a lot of interesting facts, a lot of interesting events that went on and that she talks about in her stories, and the famous men in her life. So the first one was, let me get his name because he is not from my time, okay? But he is. I think he's still alive. So he is a famous basketball player, or retired, I should say, basketball player. But I can't think of his former name. before I say the name that we all know him by. So the famous NBA star, when she dated him, his name was Ferdinand Louis Alcindor Jr. Ferdinand Louis Alcindor Jr. Okay, that's a lot, all right? So that was his name when they initially began a romance. And then he started getting into the Muslim culture and religion. And I think his parents were Catholic, I want to say. Let me see if I wrote it down. Yes, his parents were Catholic and they raised him Catholic. He went to Catholic school, I believe she said at one point. And, he grew up Catholic. And then I'm not sure who got him into Islam and converting. I'm not sure. She didn't say. But during that time when he was converting to Islam, he went through a name change, and he told her he wanted to be called Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Is it Kareem Abdul? I think that's the name. Anyway, it hopefully it sounds familiar to you, and you know who I'm talking about. The really tall. Well, that's not saying much, but you can look it up. So she was dating him for, it sounds like a good while. I think maybe a year or so. And she would live with him when she was in LA. Now, at this point, she was acting, but she wasn't a household name yet, but she was acting in the films, the blaxploitation films that we know her for. And she would sometimes travel to, I forgot what country. Well, different countries, because she did talk about one time in Italy, but there was another country where she did a couple of movies in. But when she was traveling, she was away. But when she was in LA, she would stay with Kareem at his condo. And at this point, he was a very famous up-and-coming basketball player. So when he was going through his conversion, he gave Pam Grier a book to read about Islam, and he wanted her to convert with him. Now, we all know what this religion is about and how it treats women. So, obviously, Pam Grier, being the intelligent woman that she is, she had reservations. But it sounds like this was her first serious boyfriend. So she obviously took it seriously and did read the book. And they had quite a number of, heated discussions about Islam. And she really tried to give it a fair shot, but she just couldn't quite take to the religion. So there was one incident. There's a couple that she talks about, but one incident where Kareem had some friends over, and so he asked her to make them some dinner. So she obliged, and then she presented the dinner to him and his friends. And then Kareem said, I think she went to sit at the table with them. And Kareem said, oh, no. You can't sit with us, okay? You can't be seen. So she walked out, she left. And then she went walking around somewhere, and one of Kareem's friends told on her because of how she was dressed. She went to the beach, I think she said, and she was wearing some short shorts and she had like a scarf on her head. But I think she ran into a friend, and so she embraced the friend. But just when you read her story, you can tell she's a very personable individual. She's very social, maybe an extrovert. I mean, because she has her introverted ways as well, but she definitely is a social being. And so she was talking to a man, and then word got back to Kareem, and he was not happy about that. So yeah, that relationship ended with Kareem giving her an ultimatum. Either we get married or I can marry this woman over here because she has been prepared for me. I think that's how he put it. She has been prepared. And he was basically telling her, like, you need to make a decision right here in this conversation. So, yeah, she said she wasn't ready. And we know they didn't get married. That's basically what happened there. And then you have the second man, Freddie. Oh, I started to say Junior, but he would be Freddie Prinze. So, Freddie Prinze, again, a rising star in comedy. And I think this is when he had his show. So they meet, I forgot where. And I must tell you, Freddie Prinze sounds like a smooth dude, okay? Like, you definitely can gauge, I would say, the sexual attraction between the two of them. It just it sounds quite electric, but he also sounds like a flirt, a big flirt. But anyway, they got together, and I'm not sure if he was on drugs at the time when they met, but she definitely could tell as the romance progressed that he had a drug problem. So he was, I want to say he was on the show, and I think he was on that show. I can't think of the name of the show, but he had the show, and he had this big multi-million-dollar contract or whatever, I think. But something happened, and I can't remember what the ultimate situation was that told her she can't be bothered. But eventually that relationship ended because of the drugs. And she did talk about one time where she didn't appreciate how he would sort of have a cavalier attitude about events and honors that she was given that meant something to her. You know, she invited him as her date for, I think it was the NAACP, but some award show where they were honoring Pam Grier. And he was like, again, being his flirty self. And, trying to tell her, let's just skip this award show and let's just, go half on a baby instead. And she just made a mental note of that. But you learn throughout the book that Pam Grier is not a good judge of character, okay? But she's also someone who's not bitter considering her experiences with men. There's her father, her stepfather, the men who sexually assaulted her, or the boys, I should say. The boyfriends she dated. She's definitely not a good judge of character. So, she ends things with Freddie Prinze, but she tells him, we can be friends. I still care about you. But she just saw that he was spiraling in a downward and paperless directions. So she was like, I gotta go. Okay. And throughout the book, Pam definitely lets you know that she did not do drugs, but she wasn't judgmental of others who did drugs. And I had to remind myself when I was reading her story, because sometimes I would say, like, why is she so dingy? I mean, but I had to remind myself of the time period. So you got to put things into context and perspective. You know, I am living in the 21st century with the knowledge that we have today. But in those days, it probably wasn't well known as far as the drug use. So anyway, you'll get what I'm saying when I tell you about the next man. Okay, so the third famous guy, right? We're at number 3, right? Okay, so the third one is the legendary Richard Pryor. Now, I'm sure you know, although we might be at a time where people don't know Richard Pryor, but we might have reached that generation where people haven't heard of Richard Pryor. But anyway, Richard Pryor. Okay, so I was quite confused by that because, I mean, I saw the stand-up, and because my parents, they loved Richard Pryor, I knew about the stand-up and stuff, and I didn't quite understand that relationship. Because again, I'm, my 21st century self. I'm thinking, okay, Richard Pryor is a junkie. Why would she even bother? But lo and behold, and guess who introduced them? So one day, this is when she already broke up with Freddie Prinze. But again, she doesn't seem to end things on bad terms with anyone, She doesn't seem to hold grudges, or she's not malicious or vindictive. So, she kept things positive with Freddie Prinze. So one day he calls her up and he says, hey, I want to take you somewhere. So she hops in his car and they drive over to this home. I can't remember where, but she learns that it is the home of Richard Pryor. And at this point, she describes him as, skinny with a really bad case of bad acne, okay? Richard Pryor, that is. So they meet, and Richard Pryor is his full self, okay? He's cursing and just, hey, motherfucker, hey, blah, blah. He's just using all kinds of profanity. And so he says to Freddie, so you really do know this bitch, huh? And, she stays in the car, she said. And then Richard Pryor, he gives Freddie Prinze a vial of pure liquid cocaine. I guess that was in exchange for bringing Pam over. I don't know. But she said she wants no parts of it. So she was like, hey, I got to go. And she did not enter his home, according to Pam. And then fast forward years later, Richard Pryor is still his junkie self. But, I think he's a much bigger star at this point. He's done a couple of movies, one with Pam Grier, and he's done stand-up. He's had, success in stand-up comedy. And so now she's willing to give him a shot. Now this, I really don't understand this relationship again, but it happened. And I don't know, I mean, it did sound a bit like a project. Like she was trying to see if she could turn him around and get him on the straight and narrow. I'm not sure, but she gave it a shot. She tried to help him stay clean. He was interested in going drug free, and she said, "Hey, I'm willing to help." And at that point, she moved in with him in his mansion. And yeah, Richard Pryor, like most longtime drug addicts, he was clean for a little bit and then, returned to his old habits. And eventually she left him again. But, so I should point out, there is a podcast, one of my favorites, The Plot Thickens, with, I can't think of his name. It's the host of TCM Classics. Let me get his name. Okay, so the host is Ben Mankiewicz. He is the host of the podcast, The Plot Thickens, and season 4, which is their current season, they have Pam Grier as their spotlight. So season 4 is called Here Comes Pam Grier, and I think they have somewhere around 8 or 9 episodes right now. And I was reading this book. So I started reading this book before I listened to the podcast, and I noticed, now I don't know if maybe because years have passed and you know how memories go, but she expanded on some details in the podcast that she left out of the actual book. For example, the situation with Richard Pryor. So in the book, she says, there was an incident with, a horse. And again, trigger warnings for an injured animal. I mean, that was a very rough experience to read. But, one of the horses ended up getting hurt, and Richard Pryor and Pam Grier had to rush him to the vet in her car because they didn't have obviously the transportation you would use for a horse. They didn't have it at the time. And so they rushed this horse to the vet, to try to save him if possible. And she said after that experience with Richard Pryor, she realized, she just couldn't deal with him. She couldn't see herself with him because she knew all the responsibility would fall on her because he's just, he's heavy into drugs and women, and just, he's an irresponsible old kid, I guess. So she talks about that, like that was the last straw and she left. But then on the podcast, you learn that Richard Pryor married another woman, and everyone thought Richard Pryor was marrying Pam Grier. That was the last woman they knew him to be with. And to the point that someone made a cake, to surprise Richard with, and it had Pam's name on it. And then they found out, however they found out, I guess the news and everything else, but he didn't marry Pam Grier. So, yeah, you might want to listen to the podcast after you read the book, because some details are they're missing from the book, and I don't know why. I mean, I think I know why, but, anyway. So, yeah, she left Richard Pryor, but then she went on to, become the legendary star that she is. Now, she does talk about, there were some highs and lows with her acting. Sometimes she was working, sometimes she was not. But one thing I noticed about her is that she was always humble And she wasn't one of those actresses who felt like, I have to be the star. I have to be in the lead role. I can't accept anything less. And I think that's why she has remained over the decades she always had a job, like if you look at her from the 70s on, she has consistently worked. Now, she may not have been in the lead role, but she definitely always had a job, okay? And so some of her roles that she talks about, there's this really great audition she gives for a part in I think it was Paul Newman. I can't think of the name of the movie, but she talks about that audition. And I think she's really proud of her performance in that audition. And obviously she got the part. And that seems to be a notable role for her. And then she talks about meeting Quentin Tarantino and how he was promising her some big role. And then she just thought it was, Hollywood talk, and she paid it no mind. But obviously it came to fruition, and he actually did write Jackie Brown, sort of like a homage to her 70s vixen movies, But so let me tell you about Quentin Tarantino, okay? Now, I am not really a big fan of his movies, not all that impressed with his movies, but so he made that movie, I think it's called Jackie Brown. What is it called? I really don't know, but whatever the movie is called, Buster Brown or something. I think it's Jackie Brown. But anyway, so he makes this movie for her, and Ben Mankiewicz, he interviews Quentin to talk about working with Pam Grier. And so Quentin proceeds to take credit for Pam Grier's career. This dude, he gave her one role, and he's acting like that role that's her whole career. Now, let me quote Mr. Quentin Tarantino. Okay, so he said, in reference to the movie he did with Pam Grier, I put her on a good road, and she proceeded to keep driving down that road from that point on. It was as if nothing she did before him or after was significant. It was just, he gave her that role, and that's what, then we knew who Pam Grier was. Wow. So, the very modest filmmaker, yes. All credit goes to Quentin. Okay. Now, I do have to circle back around to an incident. An incident that I found fascinating. Now, let me see if I can go to that page. Now, like I said before, Pam Grier holds no punches. She is very explicit and direct about what she experienced, what she did. And she's unashamed in, talking about her life and the people in it. So there was an incident. This is when she was dating Richard Pryor. She gets her annual checkup, and her doctor calls her into the office to have a serious conversation. Now, again, Pam Grier always says she did not engage in drugs. She did not do any of that. But this was the 70s, and we know what the 70s was like just from what you read and hear. I think we all got a glimpse of what it was like, right? So she was dating Richard Pryor, and he was on and off with the drugs, and normally her checkups go well, but this time it didn't. And so the doctor asked her if Richard Pryor was putting cocaine on his manhood during sex, because she had cocaine in her system. And so, Pam, she's astounded, and she's like, I'm not sure. But if you know Richard Pryor's stand-up, he does joke about this in his stand-up. So it's not clear. I mean, Pam sounds like she's not quite sure whether he did it or not. But then the doctor said, now let me quote. Let me quote here. So first he asked her if Richard was, applying the cocaine in the bathroom and then, coming into the bed with her after he already put it on him. So she said, that's a possibility. I'm not sure. And then the doctor says, well, we have a serious problem here. If he's not putting it on his skin directly, then it's worse because the coke is in his seminal fluid. Now, again, I just kept reading this story wondering why she was with Richard Pryor. I mean, but I don't know what they were saying about cocaine in the 70s as far as, like, I don't know if they had the PSAs and, if it was widely known how dangerous it was, because for me, I'm just like, someone who does cocaine that heavily, I don't see why you would engage in a romance with that person. But yeah, so stuff got real. And she counted that as strike number 2. That wasn't even the third strike. The third strike was the animal, okay? But yeah, so like I said, the book is well worth your time if you want to learn about Miss Pam Grier, aka Foxy Brown. Or is it just Foxy? Foxy. Let me say Foxy. But yeah, so My Life in 3 Acts is a quick read. It's a great read. And yes, I would definitely listen to the podcast, The Plot Thickens, Season 4, Here Comes Pam, because that definitely adds to the in-depth details of Pam Grier's life. So you might get more of the story if you read the book and listen to the podcast. But anyway, this is getting a little bit longer than expected, so I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, comment, subscribe if you choose. And I should mention, I almost forgot. So I did see that Pam Grier is working on a biopic. Now I did read that it was in pre-production, so there's no real details yet as far as who's going to star as Pam Grier. I mean, I can't wait to find out. Although it probably will be, I don't know, an unknown or lesser known actress, I would think. Because obviously she's got to be a younger woman, right? But it would make more sense if we didn't know if we weren't familiar with the face that plays Pam Grier, because she's so iconic. I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, I don't know. They can do what they want, but it's in pre-production, so stay tuned for that. That is exciting, and I would love to see that movie because just from what I read, that would be interesting. And then seeing someone try to play Richard Pryor, now that's going to be funny right there. Just the attempt. But anyway, let me get out of here. So that's it for me. I will catch you in the next one. Bye.